right, here we are with my brother Nick.
How's it going?
Nick, I wanted to talk to you about your 2017 Ford Focus Electric.
There are certain things, Ford Focus, the 2017 version is one of them, where it's like an amazing product that nobody knows about. I mean, considering the incredible lack of production for Ford Focus, this is something that people really need to be aware of. From the highly competitive price, by this point, $12,000, which you would think would be the price of a piece of junk, is the value of this car. Go to a dealership, 2017 Ford Focus with all the specs makes it an incredible value. I bought it for $18,000, and considering the money California gives back to you, I mean, it is a remarkable investment, Josh. Really something that everybody should be looking into.
Yeah, it's worth noting. So right now in California, you can get $2,500 back with their incentive program. I'm not sure. I don't think you could get the $7,500 tax break on used cars. But you actually got an incentive already. What was that incentive that you got?
Well, first I got $1,000, but this was a purchase from a year ago. So since that moment, I'm not sure how much things have changed.
Yeah, I know. So we actually both got our vehicles registered in Southern California Edison service area. And so when I registered mine in 2018, I only got, I think it was $500. But Nick, you registered yours in early 2019. And at that time, you got $1,000 check in the mail for registering that used car, which was pretty awesome.
Pretty awesome considering I may have spent at most like $200 to $300 in electricity over the life of this car, and I've driven it over 30,000 miles by this point. So considering the amount of savings I already get from, so far, knock on wood, having no maintenance repairs, nothing, and considering that all of from, and you I think you'd even do a better job explaining this than me, but I mean, the car, being able to drive it, when you look under the hood, there's nothing other than a battery that's driving this thing. At least it seems. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, yeah, that's amazing. And I remember when we were looking for the car originally, we had seen so many of these Ford Focus Electrics around Southern California. And it seemed like, okay, there must be a problem with these. There's like every dealership around here has it, but we've noticed since then that now you can't even find that many. Those ones that we saw in Car Gurus for sale were just eaten up. I mean, people bought them right away. So I just wanted to talk to you, Nick, about hear about your experience with your Ford Focus. You've had it for over a year now. It has, how much of a range does it have, all electric?
My experience is what they tell you is not quite what it is. It's even more than what Chevrolet or what Ford or some of the other car dealers will tell you. The reason why, like you had explained, these cars are getting eaten up is because from the 120 mile range, and I would even argue there's even more, especially on city streets when you could easily eclipse 160 miles of range on a given car charge.
You've seen 160 miles on your car?
I've experienced it, man. Yeah,
Dude.
if you're going all city, if you're, especially here in a big city, a lot of stops and whatnot helps really recharge. But to the fast charging, you could easily go from 0% to 80% in 40 minutes and get almost all of your 100 some odd miles back. And it's very easy to find either a free fast charger or a very, very cheap fast charger. That gives you 50 cents to the dollar of what you're paying for gas. So it easily makes up for whatever losses you may see in another car. And if you could see a car, a 2017 Ford anything that's under 12 grand, I'd like to hear about that, because last I checked, this is about as cheap as they get for cars. And from the fast charge to the instant response, I mean, it is the fastest and most responsive car that I've driven since one of the newer Ford Mustangs, and those are simply made for torque and power. Outside of that, the Ford Focus, from its strength to its range to its its specs. I mean, it's an incredible car.
Which is really surprising because this electric version of the Ford Focus it's a compliance car. The only reason they have it is because California forced Ford to make it. And there are definitely some downsides. I mean, it's not really comparable to the Bolt. They did cut some corners, obviously, but you know a lot about the kind of downsides and the good sides. And how many miles have you driven in the year since you had it?
Yeah, 30,000. It would be more if we weren't under such precarious situations.
Yeah. So you've actually driven quite a long distance. So you've driven a number of times from Temecula area all the way up to San Luis Obispo and back. Can you talk about that adventure and how that was? Because I imagine you had to stop a lot to charge, right?
Right. Yeah, the one difference is once you get into Timbuktu, middle of nowhere, California, you are going to probably pay a bit more for your charging because, supply and demand. But overall, even those trips aren't all that expensive. You could find prices very similar to what you would spend on gas to drive up there, and that really is that's the bar that almost they never even touch. Ford Focuses in any of the car. If I were to mention, the most significant downside, I would say is like the cutting corners. I believe they could have made a car with slightly more range, considering all of the other improvements that they made for this Focus. 120, 160 at the very best on city streets is awesome, but they certainly aren't quite as competitive as other makes and models like the Bolt I'm loving, and some of the other smaller vehicles. E-Golf is what they love to compare it to, but across the board, even the range, that is better than 90% of the cars out there for the price of under 20,000. By this point, I think you could easily find a car under 12 of a 2017 Ford Focus with low miles and the same type of performance.
Yeah. And, I'm actually, so I have a Chevy Volt, a 2016, and on level 2, my car only pulls 3.6 kilowatts, 3.3 at a public station. And what I am so envious about your car is that you actually get 20 miles an hour, I think like 6.6 or greater kilowatt speed, which is amazing. What is the fast charging speed on yours?
Fast charging is almost consistent, regardless of weather, regardless of the amount of times that you've driven. You could have been driving it nonstop at 100 miles an hour. It's funny, some of the websites that review the car say the maximum speed is 83 miles an hour. That's as fast as you can drive on it. I've tested that theory, and you can drive over 83 miles an hour. A good amount over 83, but you didn't hear that from me.
What about charging? How's I was going to say fast charging?
Yeah, regardless of how fast you're charging, you think, well, maybe the battery's too hot to charge at its maximum speed. It pulls 50 and sometimes 51 or 52 kilowatts. And for those who aren't familiar with those terms, you could pull in about a 30 to 40 minute span around 100 miles. 100 miles of charge in a half hour or slightly more.
Have you gotten to a fast charging station at like what's the lowest you've taken your battery?
About 1%.
1%. So you've seen like 1 mile left.
Yeah.
Jeez. And what was how long were you there, and what was the charging speed? Do you remember?
It was the home charger, the level 2.
Oh, the level 2.
From 1% all the way back to 100, it takes, I'd say, just a bit over 4 hours. Now, of course, there are some variables. Every home may have different, abilities, but for the most part, it's standard 4 hours for this car, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, usually the theory is you go to sleep with the car plugged in, you can go to work with a full car the next morning, but I mean, you could be nocturnal and still get that full charge pretty quick.
And that's so incredible for me because on my Volt, it takes a little over 4 hours to get 50 miles. But in the same time, you're getting 120, about 115. That's incredible. So what would you say are like 2 or 3 of the best things and two or three of the worst things about the Ford Focus Electric?
Ford Focus Electric is a long-term investment. You are putting money down initially, and you are making some sacrifices, I guess, in terms of you can't just snap the fingers and drive all the way to New York from California without having to stop somewhere. But a couple of somewheres for sure. But some of the benefits definitely has to be the amount of money that you save in the long run. Mm-hmm. And that debunks quite a bit of theories about how expensive it is, along with just the knowledge that you are really doing a number on saving the environment. As far as the cons go, the fact you do have to think about charging more than you would think about going to a gas station, unless you have a situation where you can charge every night at home and you're able to get it home within the range amount, which is true for most people. And then the other con, I would say, is that right now the availability for chargers, unless it's at your house, makes it more inconvenient than a gas station, because there certainly is a multitude amount of gas stations more than charging stations.
Yeah. And I mean, we're pretty fortunate being in Southern California. There's a lot of charging stations, more than I think any other state really. But do you have any, you have a lot of experience fast charging in public, level 2 charging in public. Have you noticed, are there any charging stations that are more reliable, or do you have a preference for a certain charging station?
I'd say that plays a little bit into the con, that it is, for the most part, a pretty safe proposition that you will be able to find a charging station that's effective. But every now and then, from not just the charging station being ineffective, on occasion I've even had a charge go halfway and charge me the full price, but for some reason there was a technical glitch along the way. But also, there are some charging stations that aren't in so safe areas, so that's something also to take into consideration. But if there was a car on the market right now that's 20 grand or less that I'm interested in using for EVs, I would choose no other one than the Ford Focus to do all of that, because of just how consistently reliable it is at pulling that 50 kilowatt, no matter how much. Like you mentioned, I've spent several times driving a 500-mile round trip in a day, and I've done that with no sacrifices on the speed or the quality of the charging I received. Not just that time, but also the almost unrecognizable degradation. I think I've probably lost maybe 2, maybe 3% degradation over an entire year. And when some folks driving other cars lose about half of their battery in just a year's time, I mean, that is incredibly competitive with just about every other car in the market.
What about, so actually I'll ask you, so degradation, you actually have noticed it's not as, you're not getting as much range out of your car, or maybe is it it's just adjusting, like they call it the guessometer. I wonder if it's maybe just adjusting to your speed, because you're still getting, like, what's the latest? I mean, you left the house this morning with a full charge. How much was it?
Full charge, it says 120 miles.
That's
now,
amazing.
Folks who first drive an EV will notice that it's predictive on how you drove the last time. So really, using the speedometer is the best method. And I drive about the same speed, about 70 miles an hour, maybe slightly less on the drive. It's a 120-mile drive. It's perfect from downtown San Diego back to the Murrieta Temecula area. And initially, I would come back with about 5 or 6 miles to spare. And now, to be comfortable, I take a stop at the Paula exit, because usually I think if I blaze straight through, I'd have only a mile or 2 left. I can definitely notice a very slight degradation. It's not as, I can tell it's not quite what it was, but we're talking 98% effectiveness.
Yeah.
So
what's your odometer right now?
31,000 miles.
Wow.
So,
and how long, do you know how long the warranty is?
They provide because it's a used car, 2017, that is something where if you do have more than 12 grand, which if you want to get a car newer than 2017, you better have more than 12 grand, or be willing to have a budget of that. That you will need to probably spend another grand or two on a good warranty. I got a 3-year 36,000, which is pretty standard.
Wow. Dang. And actually, yeah, I wanted to ask too. So have you charged at Blink before? Have you used a Blink station?
No.
But you've used ChargePoint, EVgo, any other stations?
Yes. Electrify America. Definitely have used those a few times. Pretty cool new technology. Pretty cool as well. Those are the 3 most significant ones. And I would vouch EVgo is the most convenient considering how available it is. And $6 to fill your car, I mean, you can't get a whole lot better than that.
So EVgo is your favorite just because it's in more locations, it seems like, where you go.
And the most reliable, I would say.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Dang. Are there any like features of like different charging stations that you like more? Like that? Do you like prefer a certain app on your phone or?
ChargePoint certainly provides a pretty awesome app. For some random reason, even though I love EVgo, their app when you fast charge doesn't include the battery power that is in your car. That's something you'll need another app for. And what's also awesome about the Ford Focus, I'll get back to your charging station in just a second. Ford Focus provides an app where you can detect not just the charge power, not just the time when you're going to need a charge, but also things like if I want to unlock the car doors, or if I want to climate control the car, or if I want to have the car that's plugged in not take power until a certain time, you can do that too, which is very cool. Anyways, you'll need that app in order to see the battery power of an EVgo, but ChargePoint dives in a bit deeper and does include some of that awesome information. From an app standpoint, I love ChargePoint the best. And for some reason, one other thing to add, EVgo's screen size, I mean, it's so small. From the car, I'll either need a magnifying glass or I'll need to look at camera on my phone and zoom it in 1,000 times, it seems, to see, the TV screen. For as powerful as the charger is, you'd think they have a screen size better than, I think it's like 4 inches or something. It's just
seriously?
Crazy how small it is.
Jeez. And what do you think about Electrify America? What's your experience with Electrify America?
Electrify America is pretty good. And the charging power usually is more than EVgo and ChargePoint, but I do notice that it's slightly more expensive. If you want a quick charge, I'd say 10-minute charge where you only charge part of the car. Electrify America would be awesome, but EVgo's $6 flat rate where you can get your full charge. You can charge as long as you want for $6. I mean that is just ridiculous price.
And so actually, if you could talk about that, because I remember when you told me about that the first time, I thought that was interesting because normally, I mean, how many options do you have to pay? Because you could pay by the kilowatt or by the kilowatt hour, right? And but the way you do it, how do you get that flat price of $6?
First of all, I need to preface this by saying, not only are all cars different, so that means each car demands a different amount of power, but also not all EVgo chargers have that $6 flat rate option. Additionally, some chargers, ChargePoint or Electrify America, they have options of cheaper rates or free rates. That's what I'm telling you, where over time, when you know where to go to get free charging, I mean, that is so valuable, not just for fast charging, but there are just, I mean, it's an embarrassment of options for level 2 free charging. You just got to find a place, and most likely we'll have some pretty cheap options. Anyways, for the majority of EVgo chargers, they give an option where typically in a less populated community like the Inland Empire, they'll charge 27 cents, typically 27 cents a kilowatt hour, 30 to 32 in bigger areas like LA and San Diego counties. With that said, my car, which has a battery of about 30 usable, 35 total kilowatt usage, it'll charge at about Get that full battery in a little over 45 minutes at 27 cents, either per kilowatt or per minute. It depends on the price. But long story short, $6 flat rate to go 0 to 100 or 0 to wherever you want. If I were to go 0 to 100 on the rates in the Inland Empire, it cost me about $8. LA or San Diego about $10. So the flat rate is great if you know you're going to stick around and your car is low enough where you'll get that value, adding up to 100%.
And how do you trigger that? Like, does it give you the option to pay the $6 flat rate, or like you can't do that from the app, right? You have to just swipe your credit card or something?
Yes. The $6 rate is in person, swipe your credit card. Where the other option, you can click charge now on the app. I mean, you plug in, walk a mile away, and you can still make that happen. So It's very convenient.
That's awesome. Okay, Nick, any final words on the Ford Focus Electric that people should know?
I cannot express to you just how much of a money saver this is. People think that driving electric, you have to sacrifice money. That could not be farther from the truth. I spent, $18,000 was the price of the 2017 Ford Focus for me a little over a year ago. I maybe have spent the price of my first car payment, which was $300. By the way, my first 3 car payments were paid for by the state of California on my 5-year deal for the Ford Focus. And by the way, I only put $500 down to get that $300 per month deal. It is a money saver, folks. $300 I've probably spent all year to drive 30,000 miles. Do the math. It's insane.
That's crazy.
To go along with, I haven't spent a penny on repairing my car because the Ford Focus, I mean, there's just nothing to repair. It's a tire, it's a battery, and it's the chassis. That's all there is. Ford Focus, check it out. It is